Hi, and welcome to today's Professional Development Podcast. My name is Alyssa, and today we are going to talk about augmentative and alternative communication, commonly referred to as AAC, and how we can use communication supports to better meet the needs of students with autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. This topic is important because communication affects nearly every part of a student's school experience. Students use communication to participate in academics, interact with peers, request help, express their wants and needs, and advocate for themselves. When students have difficulty in communicating, they become more frustrated or may use behaviors to communicate what they need. And as educators and support staff, our goal should be able to make sure that every student has a meaningful way to communicate and that the adults around them know how to start that communication. So let's start by talking about what AAC actually means. AAC stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. AAC includes a wide variety of communication methods and tools that can support or replace spoken language when a student has difficulty communicating verbally. AAC can be as simple as gestures, facial expressions, or pointing to pictures. It can also include picture communication systems, communication boards, PECs, or more complex speech generating devices and tablet-based communication systems. It is important to remember that AAC is not one specific device or program. AAC should be individualized based on the student's communication abilities, preferences, and needs. Research supports the use of AAC for students with ASD. Steinbrenner and colleagues in their 2020 review of evidence-based practices identified AAC as an evidence-based practice for individuals with autism. In addition, Gans and colleagues conducted a meta-analysis that found AAC interventions can improve communication outcomes for individuals with ASD. One misconception that sometimes exists is that using AAC will prevent a student from developing spoken language. Instead, AAC is intended to provide students with another way to communicate while supporting their overall communication development. Now let's talk about what this is going to look like in the classroom. One of the most important things we can do is make sure a student's communication system is available throughout the day. If a student uses a communication device, picture system, or communication board, that system should not be just sitting on a shelf or only brought out during speech therapy. That student needs access to this communication during academic activities, transitions, lunch, recess, specials, social activities, and less structured times. We also need to model to our students how to use the system. For example, if a student uses a speech generating device, we should not simply tell the student, "Tell me what you want." Instead, we can model the words or symbols ourselves. If a student wants a break, I might use the student's communication system to model the word break while saying you want a break. So I will say break and then you want a break. This shows the student how communication works without requiring them to immediately respond independently. Another important strategy is providing wait time. Sometimes adults ask a question and immediately repeat it for an answer for the student because they think they're not responding. Students using AAC may need additional time to process the question, locate a symbol, make a selection, or formulate a response. Giving a student several seconds to respond can make a significant difference. We also should provide meaningful choices. Instead of asking a student a very broad question such as, "What do you want?" we can offer choices such as, "Do you want blocks or do you want drawings?" Choices give students opportunities to communicate while also increasing their sense of control and independence. Another important point is that AAC should not only be used when a student is having a problem. We want students to use communication for many different purposes. For example, students can use AAC to request a preferred activity, answer a question, greet a peer, comment about something interesting, ask for help, reject something they don't want, or tell an adult they need a break. The more opportunities students have to communicate, the more meaningful their communication system becomes. This brings us to another important topic, challenging behavior. Sometimes what looks like a challenging behavior may actually be a student's attempt to communicate. A student who does not have a reliable way to say help, break, no, or I'm finished may communicate those through crying, yelling, refusing work, leaving the area, or other behaviors. This does not mean that every challenged behavior is caused by communication difficulty. However, communication should be considered when we are trying to understand the purpose of a behavior. Instead of only asking, how do we stop this behavior, we should also ask, what is the student trying to communicate, and have we provided an effective way to communicate it? For example, if a student frequently leaves the classroom when an academic task becomes difficult, we should teach the student to request a break or ask for help using the communication device. Then, when a student appropriately requests help or a break, we need to respond consistently. Research by Gons and colleagues supports the use of AAC interventions to improve communication and reduce some challenging behaviors. This is where consistency among staff becomes extremely important. Students with AASD may work with classroom teachers, special education teachers, paraprofessionals, speech-language pathologists, occupational therapists, administrators, and family members. If every adult responds differently to a student's communication attempts, it can make communication more difficult for the student. For example, one staff member may honor a student's request for a break, while another staff member may ignore the same communication attempt. Instead, the team needs to work together to establish consistent expectations and responses. One strategy is to create a simple AAC support guide for each student. This guide could include the student's communication system, important vocabulary, how the student communicates yes and no, how they request help or breaks, appropriate prompting strategies, and ways staff can create communication opportunities. This resource could be especially helpful for paraprofessionals, substitute teachers, and general education teachers who may not work with the student every day. Families are also important in this process. We should ask families what communication strategies work well at home and what words or phrases are important to the child. Communication should not stop when the student leaves the classroom. When school staff and families share information, we can provide more consistent support across environments. As educators, we also need to remember that the goal is not simply for the student to use a device or communication system correctly. The bigger goal is independence, participation, connection, and self-advocacy. We want students to be able to communicate with people around them in ways that are meaningful to them. Before we finish, I want to leave you with 5 important key takeaways. First, AAC should be available throughout the school day and across different environments. Second, communication systems should be individualized to the student's strengths, needs, and preferences. Third, adults should model communication rather than simply expecting students to use AAC independently. Fourth, students need frequent opportunities to communicate for different purposes, including requesting, commenting, answering, rejecting, and advocating for themselves. And fifth, collaboration among teachers, professionals, related service providers, and families is essential to successful AAC implementation. I encourage you to think about one student you currently work with who may benefit from additional communication support. Ask yourself, does this student have a reliable way to communicate throughout the entire school day? Is their communication system easily accessible? Are all staff members responding consistently? And are we providing enough opportunities for the student to communicate for meaningful reasons? Even a small change, such as keeping a communication board accessible, modeling a new word, providing additional wait time, or teaching a student to help request help, can create more opportunities for independence. Ultimately, our goal is not simply to give a student communication device. Our goal is to create an environment where the student has meaningful opportunities to communicate, supportive communication partners, in a reliable way to be heard. Thank you for listening to today's Professional Development Podcast. I hope you are able to take at least one strategy from today's discussion and apply it in your classroom or school setting to support communication and independence with students with ASD. Thank you.